Hi, I'm Dr. D. Welcome to my channel for first-time viewers, and welcome back to my returning subscribers. So, I was asked to talk to you a little bit about micro-enterprise consulting. What are some of the unique challenges of truly small-time entrepreneurs? What kind of challenges they face, and of course, what are some of the lessons that I have learned on my consulting projects working with these small-time entrepreneurs. Now, you're probably wondering, like, what's a micro-enterprise? There's a lot of definitions of it, but the European Union defines it as an enterprise that has 10 or fewer employees and normally annual revenues of 10 million euros per year or less. Okay? And in France, where the setting where I'm going to tell you this little story, there were a lot of micro-entrepreneurs who enjoyed a legal status called auto-entrepreneur. An auto-entrepreneur was someone who, it's an organizational form like an incorporation or an LLC, but basically an auto-entrepreneur meant that up to 30,000 euros per year of your income was taxed separately from your main income. And so you had a lot of auto-entrepreneurs, like maybe they worked like at the post office by day, and then they might have an auto-entrepreneur business by night. So let's say they make 30,000 euros per day as a post office worker, and then they made 30,000 euros as an auto-entrepreneur. They wouldn't be taxed as a postal worker making 60,000 euros per year, but they'd be taxed twice, once at the 30,000 euro bracket and again at the 30,000 euro bracket again, and it was a lower percentage of the income that was taxed. So that was the incentive to become auto-entrepreneurs. And this gentleman who owns a martial arts studio that I'm going to talk about in this presentation was an auto-entrepreneur. So one of the things that I think I really took away from this project working with a micro-enterprise was not so much storytelling, but story listening. And you have to think about what I mean here. As consultants, we normally have like our predefined frameworks, we have all the tools, and we go into an organization basically telling them what to do, what needs to be done, and how to fix it. That's why they pay us the big bucks. And by the way, all of you that take your MBA classes are used to being exposed to that kind of framework, right? You're the expert, you have all the answers. But this project really taught me a lot of my consulting, and it's really influenced my consulting since then, is the value of not storytelling as a consultant, but understanding the need to story listen, to actually be able to listen to stories. And a lot of these micro enterprises, they don't need a fancy BCG2 matrix. That's not really where their needs are. They need a lot more instruction and a lot more basic things. And of course, we have all these tool sets and toolkits in our mind as consultants, but we don't need to like impose that on them and frame it in some sort of a fancy MBA way. We need to listen to their story and then kind of back brief a story to them in a language that they can understand. So it involves a much more embedded and embodied approach to organizational consulting, and I'll give some examples of that throughout this presentation. But I made a few notes as I was prepping this presentation. Let me just tell you a little bit about this client. The client was somebody that I met in graduate school. He was a martial arts instructor, and I actually trained at his studio. We became friends, and eventually I convinced him to hire me on as a consultant because he really needed a lot of help. He had just 2 employees in his organization. So there was the martial arts master, who was certified to teach 4 different styles, which is kind of unusual in the martial arts world, at least in France. Most of your martial artists are really proficient in like 1, maybe 2 martial arts, but he was actually certified to teach 4 different ones. He trained Brazilian jiu-jitsu, he trained in Kajukembo, and he also had some sort of a certification to train mixed martial arts, and also one to train in wrestling, okay, Brazilian wrestling specifically. So those were kind of his 4 different certifications for teaching. It's an unusual combination. And of course, he had his wife, and he basically just delegated all of the business functions to her. Now, this is kind of interesting because she wasn't interested in martial arts, and she wasn't interested in really helping with the business. She had her own career, and she was very interested in that. So this was kind of part of the problem. Now, this place had a fantastic location. It was very spacious. It was 30 meters squared. That's like 3,300 square feet of space to train in. It's a big place. It was in kind of a dodgy part of town, so the rent was really, really low. It had really easy access to public transportation. There was a main subway line that went through this city. It was right off that main subway line. In fact, it was just 4 blocks away, so it was easy to get there, right? And fortunately, the main subway line ran from like 5 in the morning till almost midnight, right? So it was very easy to get there, you know, connections every 10 minutes, very, very well located. And this guy was a very proficient martial artist. You know, he wasn't like a gold medalist in judo or, you know, an internationally known like MMA fighter or anything like that, but he was very good. But despite all of these advantages, he really struggled to attract sufficient clients. In fact, you know, I started kind of doing a little bit of digging, and I said, well, what do you think your revenues are? And he hummed and hawdled. I said, well, I believe it's around 20,000 euros per year. Okay. You believe? Well, how many clients do you have? Well, I'm not sure. I think maybe 30. It's hard to say. I never saw 30 there when I trained with him, at least in the beginning. I usually saw more like 15, maybe 20. And so what do you think your expenses are? Well, you know, maybe around 30,000 euros per year, something like this. He really didn't know. And I'm going to talk more about why that is in just a couple of minutes. Now, the studio also offered basically martial arts instruction for about 4 hours a day on average, and he did that 5 days a week. What he wound up doing, he offered Kajukembo from 4 to 6, and then no-gi, Brazilian jiu-jitsu, or Brazilian wrestling, luta livre, whatever you want to call it, from 6 to 8, and he offered that schedule Mondays and Wednesday evenings. Then he offered Brazilian jiu-jitsu with a gi on from 10 to 1, and then he had this like one standalone MMA class that was like from 6 to 7 at night. And then Thursday and Friday he offered no-gi, Brazilian jiu-jitsu, or luta livre from 4 to 6, and then he offered Kajukembo from 6 to 8. So we kind of flopped the schedules around. Now, this guy really wanted to be the kind of martial arts studio where he could train professional fighters. He wanted to be kind of like a mecca. He always laughed. He said he wanted to have like a studio kind of like Bas Rutten. You know, Bas Rutten was or is, I guess, a mixed martial arts fighter, and he has a studio in California, and people come from all over the world to train with Bas Rutten. That was what this guy wanted to do. But when you looked at his actual clientele, you found that they were mostly men, ages about 30 to 50 years old. And, you know, these were not guys that were ever going to be professional fighters. If you start training in any sport, you know, at age 30, you know, you're probably already past your peak of your physical prowess, or maybe you're just coming into it. It's unlikely that you're going to develop sufficient skill to become some sort of a professional fighter, especially when you're only training, you know, on this very unusual schedule that the client offered. Now, within a 4-mile radius of where this guy had his martial arts studio, there are actually 10 different competitors. And he knew most of them. Some of them, you know, were people that he kind of knew pretty well. Some of them were people he didn't like that he had competed against. And some of them were guys that he was kind of friendly with. And the competition was quite varied. There were some that actually offered a legitimate martial arts studio experience, kind of like what this guy offered. They had a physical address. That was a physical location where you could actually go and train pretty consistently. There were a couple that had that. There were also some that, in this city in France, you could actually rent out public spaces for an entire year. The city just owned these buildings, and what could you do in these public spaces? Like you could call the city and say, hey, my kid's having a birthday party. I don't want to host it at home because my apartment's too small. Can I rent out a public space for like 4 hours on a Saturday morning for my kid's birthday party? And you just pay a fee to the city, and you could rent it. They also had it sometimes for conferences, you know, things like that. These were not particularly fancy places. They were just large buildings. So there were several of the martial arts competitors that had some sort of a setup like this, where they didn't actually have their own location, or they didn't rent somewhere consistently, but they just kind of would rent these public buildings. To illustrate, there was a guy who offered Chinese boxing just down the street from where he trained, from where this martial arts studio was, and we talked to him, and he said that he had martial arts training in Chinese boxing 1 day a week. It was Wednesday from 6 to 9 o'clock, and he paid the city only 1,000 euros to be able to rent for that Wednesday for the 3 hours for the whole year, just 1,000 euros, so pretty low cost. And this guy wasn't really interested in making money. He had a day job, but you know, it was a way for him to kind of share his passion for Chinese boxing. And a lot of these martial arts masters, as they get older, that's a way for them to continue honing their skills, is through teaching and coaching, even if they're not really competing actively as they once did. So there were several guys like that. And then there were also what I call ephemeral martial artists, and these were guys that maybe had a martial arts studio in some other city, but they would travel around France and offer like one-time workshops. Maybe they would come just once or twice a year, and they'd offer an entire day's training for like, I don't know, a whole day of training for women's self-defense on a Saturday. And then you would just basically pay your one-time fee, learn as much as you could in that one day, and then this martial arts master would move on to the next city, and they'd kind of do this circuit around France. There were a lot of people that did that too. And they were pretty regularly ephemeral martial arts classes. Again, they used publicly rented spaces for this training. They didn't pay much to rent the space for a day, and they'd hope they'd get like 20 or 30 clients in the day. They usually take cash payments, and then they'd move on to the next city. And this was kind of designed to supplement their income, whether it's from their day job or from their day job as a martial arts instructor. There were some places that we called mega martial arts studios. These were ones that had really famous instructors. There was a gold medalist in judo, for example, that had a martial arts studio called the House of Judo. And you know, he had like a multi-story building. He had dozens of instructors, and people came from all over France to train with this guy. So there were some people like that, but they weren't really that close to this particular client. And especially when you look at France, you got people taking public transportation. It's not, no matter how good the instructor is, it's not practical to regularly go an hour to an hour and a half with public transportation just to train in martial arts. Most people are not going to do that. So we didn't really consider them true competitors to this particular client. So let's talk about some of the challenges and what we tried to do to fix those challenges. The first challenge that I talked about with the client is I didn't really feel like he knew what he wanted to do. He didn't really have any sort of a coherent identity or brand. It's, you know, what is exactly you're trying to do with this martial arts studio? Because most of his competitors could kind of say, you know, I'm doing this not to make money, but I'm doing it to continue training other people in martial arts, to share my passion. Okay, that's one thing. You look at some of the mega studios, they said, you know, we're trying to train the next judo champion, the next boxing champion of France or of Europe. That's what we're here for. They can tell you quite clearly. And you'd ask my clients, well, you know, I'd kind of like to train, you know, some people in martial arts, maybe to be champions, but you know, I really want to enjoy my lifestyle, and I'm trying. He just really didn't even know. And I could have been the typical consultant, like just drilled it down on him and really forced him to come up with it. But I said, you know what? Let's, instead of me telling you that you need to come up with your brand image, what if we started talking to some of your customers and see what, you know, what kind of brand image you were going to do. And I'm going to tell you about that in just a second. He also had kind of a mismatch between what he offered and what the customers wanted. In fact, the customers absolutely hated the schedule. Nobody liked to have to sneak out of work to make a 4 to 6 martial arts class. They didn't like that. They wanted some of the classes later. A lot of the clients also wanted classes to be offered before they went to work in the morning. Everybody wanted classes to be offered on the weekends. So, you know, he wasn't really all that friendly towards working adults. That's one thing that we found out. So that there wasn't a real match between what he offered and what they wanted. So we worked together to create some sort of a portfolio of services at his studio that better match customer needs. And I'll tell you a little bit more about that in a second. He also didn't have enough money to make the business sustainable. Like I mentioned, he was probably losing about 10,000 euros a year, and he'd been doing this for 3 years. His wife was, quite frankly, getting tired of it. Additionally, they didn't really have a break-even point derived. They had never kept a budget. His wife just wasn't that interested. It's not because she couldn't do it. She was a very intelligent person. She just wasn't interested. And so I sat down with her. We did some of the math. We did some real basic accounting in Excel, showed her how many clients she needed to attract per year to basically get some sort of at least a break-even point. Also, there was a peculiar way that martial arts instruction was paid for, and every martial arts studio practically in the city did the same thing. You didn't pay for your lessons per month, but what you would do is you would pay all the money up front for the whole year. So like in September, you paid for the whole year's worth of lessons. So this guy, and if you paid in cash, you got like a 10 or 15% discount, right? And so what he would do is he would just take all the money in at the beginning of the year. He'd write a receipt to the people once he took the money in cash, and then he didn't really account for what happened to all of the cash during the year. And this was really bad because once people paid their money up front, he had to teach them the whole year and didn't really get any consistent income flows during the year because of this. I'll talk to you in a second about some of the things that we did to work out making sure that he had consistent income throughout the year. Again, as I mentioned, he had a very, very large dojo. 300 meters squared is really big, but he only used just a little bit less than a third of it for actual martial arts training. He used a big portion of it for a conference space. Yes, you heard me correctly. Like, and I don't mean a martial arts conference, but like a business conference space. It was, you had to walk across the dojo mats to get to the back, and there was like this space where he had like a projector and some tables and chairs and stuff. And his idea was that there was very limited conference facility space within this little area because it was kind of a rough area, and he hoped that he could like charge a fee for people to rent it out for like their business meetings and stuff for the day. Well, you know, nobody's going to go to a dojo and walk to the back of a dojo for a business meeting. It doesn't make any sense, right? Is this a dojo or is this a business space? It was almost like a WeWork kind of thing that he was thinking of, although this was before WeWork really became a thing. And I even said, since the 3 years that you've had this dojo, how many people have actually rented this conference space? And not one had ever done that. It was weird. You don't think about a conference rental space and a martial arts studio. It's strange. And then he also had this other area, and it was like real weird. It was like a shower / dingy locker room / dirty weight room / his personal kitchen, because he and his wife had like their own little studio apartment in the back of the dojo, and that's where they made their own personal meals. It was dark. It was really uninviting. Nobody really wanted to change clothes there. Nobody took a shower there. There was a toilet there in the back too. It was just gross. So we worked with him to better utilize his existing space, and I'll talk to you again about that in just a second. Again, there was a lot of race to the bottom competition in the area because there were 10 other competitors, and some of them didn't even care about the money, so they were able to charge very, very little. Like I mentioned, the Chinese boxing instructor, he only needed to make 1,000 euros for the year in order to break even. And even if he lost some money, he didn't care. So he charged, I think he only charged $150, 150 euros for once a week Chinese boxing lessons for a whole year. It was very cheap. So you had a lot of people really just not charging very much money, and that wasn't healthy for any of the martial arts masters. And so what we wound up doing is suggesting that maybe he start working with his competition, and I'll tell you exactly how that intervention went. And again, there was very little business acumen in the business, and I'm not even talking about the fancy stuff that you need for like consultants, you know, what's the strategy or, you know, all that stuff. There was no need for a Lean Six Sigma kind of intervention. There was just, they weren't even doing the basics. And this is something that I talk a lot about with some of my clients. They said, well, you know, can you work with our team to do like this, you know, fancy matrix that we remember from our MBA program, or can you help us look at the books? That's, for these micro enterprises, they don't even need anything that sophisticated. Like, it's not even a matter of looking at the books. Sometimes it's even creating the books, right? I tried to convince him to separate his business and his personal life, because that's what you learn, right? You know, real basic stuff. Fortunately, he didn't listen to me about separating his business and his personal life, and that wound up working out very well for him, and that goes into, you know, story listening. So we knew there were some things that needed to be done, but I was open-minded. You know, how could we do this? So instead of like, one thing I like to do with a lot of clients is we'll use the business model canvas, and we'll do kind of like an inductive training exercise. So I'll make a big glossy business model canvas, I'll stick it on the wall, and we'll have all the employees, you know, write on sticky cards and kind of populate the business model canvas, and that can give you some sort of an idea of what you're actually doing versus what your proposed strategy is. Well, that was totally inappropriate for this case because he didn't exactly have a proposed strategy. And a lot of the basic building blocks of the business model canvas he didn't have. It would have been pointless for me, in fact I tried it and it was pointless, for me to sit there with him and his wife trying to derive this stuff. So what we did instead is after one of our nights of training, we all sat around in a big circle, because that was kind of something that happened in this martial arts studio. People just kind of sit around after training and just chit-chat, you know, drink your water, cool off. And so what I did is I explained that we were trying to help our client out, our martial arts master out, and I basically just asked questions in a very simple way that kind of roughly corresponded to the business model canvas. And I asked him something very interesting. I said, you know, these are some of the things that, you know, it seems that we're trying to do in this martial arts studio, train, you know, world-class fighters and stuff. And I said, what do you guys think about that? Now, of course, I tried to tell my client that that wasn't exactly what was going on, but, you know, he needed to hear from his customers first. And what the guys gave for feedback was quite interesting. The first thing they said is they liked the instructor. They came year after year because they liked the instructor himself. And some of you have probably watched like martial arts movies. You probably have a pretty good idea for what, you think of when you think of a martial arts instructor, like this disciplined, cool as a cucumber type of person. Well, this guy was completely not like that. I mean, he was more of the stereotype of a Frenchman who told dirty jokes and things like that, and people liked that. They liked coming there because they liked him. When you would train, sometimes you didn't know, were you doing like going to a stand-up comedy show, were you doing martial arts? It was really unclear, but that really made training so hard kind of fun because you got to hear his jokes along the way. And that's why people kept coming year after year. That was something that he didn't think about. It was all about him. And for me, this was a huge insight, right? It never occurred to me that for a martial arts master, you would go just because you liked the instructor. The other thing that the guys liked, it's not so much that any of them were trying to be professional fighters, but they liked the fact that they could go there and they could train and they didn't feel like they were worried about getting hurt, right? Because these are guys in between the ages of 30 and 50. They have their day jobs. They're not trying to be professional fighters. They've got to go home to their wives and kids afterwards, and they have to be able to work the next day. So they liked the fact that they could really work out, they could learn a little bit about self-defense, but the risk they felt of them getting hurt from training was quite low. That wound up being a big, and that never occurred to me either. That wound up being huge on his competitive advantage chart, and that was really something cool. They also really liked his buffet approach. A lot of these martial arts studios in France, when you paid for your annual membership, you paid for like 3 lessons per week or 4 lessons per week or 2 lessons per week or whatever. But if you wanted to train more, you had to pay a supplementary fee. This guy only offered one set of fees. You paid once and you go all the training you wanted. They like that. And that's very unique in France, right? If any of you ever go to France, no, you can't get free refills on the soda. No, you can't go to the all-you-can-eat buffet. Like, nothing is ever all you want. It's always like an a la carte kind of approach. And so they liked his buffet-style approach to martial arts training. That wasn't something that occurred to me either. But they did complain that even though there was a buffet approach, they didn't like the fact that they wanted to do more training, but they couldn't because of this very bizarre schedule. They made some suggestions that maybe he offer more courses throughout the day, stop offering courses from 4 to 6, and then 6 to 8. But what if he started offering lessons from like pardon me, there were some birds behind me that were fighting. It distracted me for a second there. But they also wanted courses like from 8 to 10. They also wanted him to offer courses on the weekends and on Sundays as well. They wanted to train more so that they could progress, especially the people that did his Brazilian jiu-jitsu with the gi on, with the uniform on, because it just wasn't enough for them to progress to come, once a week on Tuesday for 3 hours. It just wasn't enough for them to actually get better. So they wanted more lessons. They also talked about the fact, and I didn't know about this until I actually heard it from the customers, but your real money maker in martial arts is actually not training guys in the 30 to 50 age range. It's people that have children and they want like kids karate or kids jiu-jitsu, to help the kids develop character, discipline and stuff. And they all pointed out that he needed to hire somebody who would be willing to work with kids, because this client did not take students under the age of, I think it was 16. So they all said that they thought that having kids instructors would be really beneficial, and a couple of them said they would pay to have their kids into his classes because they enjoyed it so much. They'd also like their kids to be something that they could share with their children. Again, they liked the fact that they could, especially the guys that were in their 40s, they liked the fact that they could train hard, but not too hard. Like not hard enough to get themselves hurt or just like wipe out all the energy, but they could at least feel like they were staying in shape. They also talked about the fact that they didn't feel that the martial arts studio had a women-friendly atmosphere. And this was a huge thing for the instructor to hear. In fact, I hadn't thought about it either. But they said, a lot of them had wives and girlfriends. Their wives and girlfriends complained that they would go train at night, especially on Friday nights, date night. They said, if you made the class a little bit more women-friendly and offered maybe discounts to get women in the door, their girlfriends and their wives could come with them. And they also suggested that the instructor offer things like women's self-defense seminars. So they could just kind of start getting women in there. And one of the guys kind of laughed. He said, well, what they say is that couples who train together stay together. And that's true. If you can share something with your significant other, it becomes a little bit more enjoyable, right? They also suggested that he host ephemeral workshops. A lot of them complained that they trained with this client during the week, but then they would still have to pay extra money to go to these different ephemeral workshops from these kind of traveling martial arts masters. And they said they would rather that some of those workshops be offered in his studio. Even if they had to pay, it was okay, but they could continue going to the same location, training with the same people, their friends, etc. Again, it went back to worried about getting hurt, even though they wanted just a little more out of their martial arts experience. So this was a huge thing, right? So we started talking about let's embrace your image as a safe, fun place to train that could also be kind of a family atmosphere. And that was something else they liked about his studios. They felt like they were going to, like, you know, if you think of the way they described it, you think of like Cheers, where everybody knows your name and that's like your usual place to go hang out with your friends. They liked the martial arts club because they felt like that was their place to go. Yes, they could train, they get some workout, they learn some self-defense, but they're also seeing their friends. They really like that kind of family atmosphere of the dojo. So this was the feedback that we got from the clients. And so we started talking about how do we capitalize on that. Well, before we even did that, as I mentioned, I worked with his wife to do some bookkeeping, and we started looking at ways to have continuous income throughout the year, ways to get some money. So what I did is I suggested to the client, I said, why don't you reach out to these other martial arts masters who are offering ephemeral courses and see if you can host them. And so we did. We called every single person that had hosted an ephemeral workshop in the city in the past 2 years, and we explained, hey, look, we've got this great dojo. It's better than those like dumpy public buildings. You know, we've got punching bags here. We've got, you know, martial arts mats so you can train safety. You know, if people fall down, it, you know, kind of cushions you. We've got a locker room. We've got a toilet that works. Toilets that work in France, that is something special. So we've got all these things. It's a better facility, and you know, we talked to the martial arts masters that were kind of these traveling ephemeral guys, and most of them said, well, you know, okay, that sounds pretty good, and then they started working out different ways of payment. Some of them, they just wanted to pay a fee to this client just to rent the studio for the day. Some of them also suggested maybe they could split the fees 50-50 if his wife would do the marketing to try to get more clients. And so this wound up working out really well because these ephemeral masters got more customers coming in because my client already had his students that would come to these ephemeral workshops if they were at his workshop. So they had new customers plus their returning customers. And then of course, since his wife started doing some marketing, they also had the potential to get new customers. So my client won and these ephemeral masters won. I spoke to him about other things to get continuous income, and we started doing some brainstorming, again with the clients, asking them what they wanted. Several of the older guys also wanted private lessons. Some of them, you know, maybe they weren't very good with their boxing, they wanted some extra instruction there. So they started paying for private lessons. That gave him, and they were paying per lesson, so that was a way to get him some extra money. Then we also looked at, they kind of wanted to hang out more at the martial arts studio. They liked the fact that they could train, but sometimes they just wanted to see their friends and just hang out. And so what one of them suggested, which I thought was interesting, is what if you paid the money for like a pay-per-view fight? And then, I'm not sure exactly how, I don't remember, I think he paid for a special license for public showing of a pay-per-view fight, so he wasn't breaking the rules or anything. But they said, you know, why don't you pay for a pay-per-view fight, and you know, you and your wife like go out to the grocery and buy some beers, some wine or whatever, and some snacks, and then we could actually use like that conference room, and you know, bring just everybody come. We pay like a fee, like 15, 20 euros, and we watch the fight. We eat, we hang out, we have a few laughs, and you know, just a cool place to hang out on Saturday. We actually wound up going then. That became one of the more popular programs. He did eventually get rid of the conference room space, but because of that, we did keep the projector and the drop-down screen so we could watch the fights. People just kind of sat on the floor. There was some kind of like easy chairs, kind of like the one I'm sitting in here, so that people could watch the fights. So that was a way to get continuous income throughout the year. We also redesigned the studio layout. Oh, I forgot to mention, looking at those ephemeral courses that I mentioned. Because he started inviting these people for ephemeral workshops, a lot of them had their own martial arts studios in different cities. They started inviting my client to do ephemeral workshops in their martial arts studio. So he was actually able to get even more income from that, and some of his students in our city would go to the other city for these specialty ephemeral workshops that he was offering. So because he collaborated with very distant competition, they got more clients, he got more clients. It was really cool. We also had him redesign the martial arts studio to better use his fixed assets. So instead of like the conference room, we turned that into another space for martial arts training. That weird dingy locker room place, we turned into a really pretty looking weight room. And and we also outfit it with some stuff for CrossFit and cross training and some of that stuff. We did keep the shower there, even though very few people use it, and we did keep the bathroom, but the locker room we really shrank down because nobody was really using it. That wasn't something that, most people came already dressed and ready to train. They didn't need to go and change clothes. So we redesigned that. So what you wound up having is a place where you could potentially have 3 different courses of martial arts going on at once. You could have people training in one part of the studio on one martial art, training in another part of the studio on another martial art, and then he wound up eventually offering like personalized training and CrossFit in the weight room area. So you could have 3 different lessons going on at once. It was also great for the ephemeral courses because he was able to offer weight training the days of the ephemeral courses, and some of these ephemeral courses were drawing like 70 or 80 people, so it wound up being able to use more of the dojo to accommodate everybody for these kind of temporary courses. We started working more with his local competition as well, in addition to these ephemeral dojos. Looked at a lot of these guys that offered like the Chinese boxing guy that only offered courses Wednesday evenings, and he actually hired that guy as an instructor. Just paid him a wage. And so that instructor liked it because he was making more money being paid as a full-time or part-time instructor for the dojo. He was able to get a new crop of students because what he really wanted to do is just train people. So he got a brand new bunch of students that he was able to work with. He got paid. He didn't have to fool with the city anymore. He was just an employee. He wasn't like this entrepreneur that was just doing it for personal stuff. Another brilliant move that he did is there was a rival across the air, had a Taekwondo studio about 4 miles away. They didn't exactly get along on a personal level, but he wound up hiring the guy to teach kids Taekwondo, and that wound up being a really good after-school program so that they could populate the dojo at a time when a lot of your working professionals weren't there. He paid that guy, the Taekwondo instructor. The Taekwondo instructor didn't have to have his own dojo anymore, didn't have to worry about rent. He was struggling to break even anyhow, and so he just got paid as an instructor. And my client wound up getting all of that guy's old students and attracting a whole bunch of new students as well. So that wound up making a lot of money as well. Everybody was a winner in this case. And in fact, he wound up hiring enough instructors from these other little locations, these other little schools in the area, that what you wound up having was, this was a place where you could go train in martial arts. The first class was offered at 5:30 in the morning for people that wanted to train before work, and the last class ended at 10:30 at night, and that wound up being that there was activity 7 days a week. This was totally unusual in this city. You could go, because of the buffet rule that when you paid one fee, you could train in anything you wanted. You could train in any number of martial arts, and certain times of the day there were even multiple classes occurring at the same time. Right, so you had Taekwondo over here and then MMA over here, and maybe you want to do more MMA and less Taekwondo, or vice versa. Whatever you wanted to do, you could do. And there were a lot of people who didn't really want to do martial arts, but they liked the idea that he had some personal training classes and CrossFit, and they'd go in the back weight room and train. But because again it was the buffet approach, sometimes they'd train in some martial arts, and this wound up increasing his client retention year after year. Right. We also worked on just creating a business plan for his reference, and his wife started kind of getting involved more with a marketing plan, helped him with a website, design social media and stuff like that. It's just some basic stuff, nothing too fancy, right? So what wound up being the result of this? This was a guy who barely struggled with 30 clients. And I called him recently. He has more than 200 students right now. 200 students in martial arts. That's huge. That's crazy, right? And the reason I say that's crazy is because martial arts is like one of the first things people will drop when they get tired of it, they get bored of it, they run out of money, whatever. That's like one of the first things people cut is going to martial arts. But people are going year after year after because he now offers such a unique product. Now, is what he's doing perfect? No. But is it better than it was? Yes. And I think that's what we need to look at with micro enterprises. And he's actually making very good money now. He's able to pay all of his instructors. Things are going really, really well for him. And that's a triumph. Does it match, perfectly the MBA school training that, I teach you guys? No. But, it's not about me telling him he had to do it my way. It's about me being willing to listen to what he needed and what his clients needed and being able to find other solutions. So let's talk about some pluses and minuses of this particular consulting intervention. So the thing I was really surprised about working with him is he was really open to trying different business ideas. He said, you know, look, I'm a martial artist. I don't know anything about business. So whatever you tell me, I'm going to believe you. He was so easy to work with. You think about when you work and, you know, do a consulting project for, you know, a large corporation, you find resistance the whole way through. Like every single step of the way, people are resentful that you're there. He was so open and so appreciative of everything I did. It was just a pleasure working with him. Another thing that was a positive is, even though some of these other martial arts instructors he wasn't really friendly with, he wound up being able to put aside his differences to work with them so that they could create win-win situations. Again, like the Taekwondo instructor, they weren't really friends. In fact, they didn't get along at all. Of course, that was part of the cool thing about me being a consultant. I was at least able to kind of be the talking head for my client and kind of start breaking down these bridges, because they weren't exactly on speaking terms. But once we kind of showed the numbers that it was of mutual benefit to the others, they were able to put aside their differences. Now, one side note this guy offered, one side note for this project, this guy offered all of his instructors, if they worked from his instructor, they could actually train in any of the other, they actually basically got a free membership to the dojo. And so a lot of these other instructors would cross-train, and the Taekwondo instructor started taking my clients' MMA classes and vice versa, and they actually wound up becoming friends. It also helped with client retention that the different instructors worked across different martial arts, because, you know, it's like you're training MMA, wow, that Taekwondo guy, I actually really like him, I want to train with him too. So then they would take even more advantage of the buffet stuff, and then the instructors would kind of help each other out. Like, you know, you're in the MMA class and you didn't quite understand what the instructor said, but great, you're partnered up with the Taekwondo guy and he could kind of help with some of that stuff too. So it really enhanced the client experience. So it was great that they were actually able to become friends. You know, even though he had been doing this like weird schedule and the weird studio layout, he was totally open to change it. You know, I kind of laugh. I think about one time I worked for a healthcare company, and, you know, and we argued for 6 months about where, you know, to put the printer. It was so easy to work with him. I said, you know, this doesn't match what the clients want. Let's just try it. Okay, let's try it. I mean, he was so open. Now, some of the minuses. I did try to convince him to separate his business and his lifestyle. He just wasn't going to do that. And by the way, that was a good thing. People liked the fact that they could also have their leisure activity also, you know, be both going to hang out, watching the fights on TV, going to train with their friends. They liked the fact that they knew this client was always there and they could go chat with them. And sorry, I'm in an area that has javelinas. I thought I heard one behind me, but I didn't. But he was open to actually changing, pardon me. Yeah, javelinas are scary. It kind of made me lose my train of thought, so I apologize for that. But he wasn't open to separating his business and his lifestyle, and the clients actually liked that. It attracted more clients. So fortunately, he didn't listen to me on that, but I listened to him, and I was willing to kind of see what worked, and we tried it, and it was great. One thing I wished I could have gotten him away from was insisting on upfront payments, because I always felt like there were people that might want to start training in a martial art like in February, but they didn't start training in September, and then he'd make them pay the whole year. I felt like he missed out on some of that. He still insisted on that, and the other thing I didn't like was the fact that once he would get those cash payments, he'd like run out right away and start buying new equipment and stuff. It made it hard once you had all that money up front for him to stay on budget, and so it was a little challenging to keep the budget on track. But I could have sat there and like squeezed him and really bothered him. Oh, well, this doesn't match the MBA school stuff because you didn't keep a budget and accounting, blah, 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 blah. But you know what? We tried so many other things and we were so successful in getting new clients and new services and all this other stuff that even though his budgeting like isn't exactly perfect, he's doing so well that it doesn't really matter as much. He doesn't have to tighten his belt so much because he's doing so well and everything else. So again, that goes back to being more of a story listener. Yeah, it doesn't have to be perfect with a micro enterprise, right? It just has to be good enough for them to meet whatever their goals are, right? He wanted, and by the way, he was willing to change some of his goals. He wound up not being a professional martial arts training studio to being one that was designed around leisure and family and fun and stuff like that. So he was willing to change. But that was only because he was willing to listen to me, and that inspired me to be more about listening to him. Not forcing the MBA way, not forcing the consultant way, but finding ways to actually listen to what he really needed, what his customers really needed, and then just kind of making some tools on an ad hoc basis. And so there was a lot of integration throughout this project. It was a benefit that he unified his lifestyle and his business, contrary to everything that you've learned. He was willing to form partnerships with the community, going out to schools to promote the after-school Taekwondo, for example. Actually, educators really became, high school and elementary school educators really became great advocates for his business. So working with the community was so helpful. Not focusing on competing and being the best martial arts student in the area by snuffing out the competition, but rather inviting them to be part of the project. And everybody won with this. The instructors that he hired got more money, more clients, less stress, and he was able to offer more services, which also attracted more students and gave him better success too. And again, I like the idea of induction for a business model canvas, but a lot of that induction can just be listening to the clients and the clients' customers as well, and that's okay, right? Now I got to ask, how is this different from some of the consulting stuff that you do for your large multinational corporations, your S&P 500? Again, what a lot of those people want in these large corporations is they want you to be more of a storyteller. They want you to go in and have the answers because they're in a hurry, that kind of stuff. Again, with these micro enterprises, you just got to be a little bit slower. You've got to do a little bit more listening, and and be able to create new things just for them. So, with a big corporation, you have to be kind of a consultant / coach, right? You have all the answers and you're teaching them. I think for micro enterprises, it actually is a better thing to be more of a cheerleader, right? Showing them how to be the best they can be for whatever their goals are. I think that's a big deal. Also, you have to remember, we focus so much on these strategic management tools, like you're going to do it my way. A lot of this was about being flexible with your strategy. You think of a large corporation, they've invested in resources and manpower and blah, 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 blah. And so their strategy is like a freight train. Once it gets going, it's very hard to turn it around. At best, you can maybe steer it a little bit to the right and left. With these micro enterprises, they can be a lot more flexible. And so it doesn't hurt to try new things, like collaborating with a close competitor. You can just try new things and see if it works, right? And so I think one of the other things you have to look at is with these bigger firms that you'll consult for, there's a lot more complexity. And so you focus a lot more on technical tools to solve very, very small managerial problems. But with micro enterprises, it's more about getting the basics, very basic things like basic bookkeeping, basic strategy, basic customer needs. The complexity is just not there yet, and so forcing tools on people is just not appropriate. You need to be, again, more of a listener and more of a cheerleader than providing directives to your clients. Well, I hope this story has been interesting and helpful for you. If you like it, make sure you give me a thumbs up. Feel free to subscribe. Comment down below if you have any questions, especially my friends who may have their own micro enterprises. I definitely welcome your comments. Did you find this that also matched yours? I think this approach has worked for several micro enterprises. One other piece of advice I might ask you as micro enterprise owners is try the sunshine approach to consulting. A lot of people wait till it's too late to hire a consultant. I was thinking about Gordon Ramsay's kitchen nightmares. If anybody could turn a restaurant around, it's going to be Gordon Ramsay, right? But something I think I read 80% of those restaurants still flop within a year after Gordon visits them. And it's not because Gordon's a bad restaurant consultant. It's because these businesses have such deep-seated problems already that even Jesus couldn't turn them around, right? See a consultant early on. Get some ideas, start thinking about it, be willing to try these new things right from the get-go. Don't wait. Now, this guy had been doing this stuff for 3 years, but fortunately his wife had her own job and she was able to subsidize the business, but he could have failed had he not had his wife's side income, right? But fortunately, he was able to last long enough so that we could start this project, and now he's extremely successful. So try the sunshine approach to consulting. Great. I'm looking forward to seeing you in the next video.